everybody, welcome back. Hope you had a great week. I'm excited. Today we get to talk about our first classification of serial killers, the visionary killer. Before we get started with that though, I got a couple house cleaning items. I just want to get them out of the way. First, in the description of this video and in all the videos in this series, you're going to see a list of books. These are books that I highly recommend if you just want to learn more about serial killing. They're written by some of the giants in the field, and we've used some of those books in creating these videos. Second, I've also included links to the PowerPoints that we're using in these videos, just in case you want that information for whatever reason it's there. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. Today we're talking about our first classification of serial killers, the visionary killer. Visionary killers are people who kill because they have a psychotic break from reality. They're not operating under the same realm of reality that the rest of us are. They believe, based on their psychotic break, that they're answering the call of God or some other deity, or they're compelled to kill because some demon will do something evil to them or the people they know or to others, to avert a natural disaster, to keep themselves from dying. Whatever the reason is, in their reality, in their psychotic reality, they believe that death and the kills that they make are the only way of surviving or of doing whatever they are compelled to do to stave off whatever bad consequences they believe will occur. I want to start out, before we get too involved in the visionary killers though, by putting out a couple cautionary warnings. Number one, we're not talking about the majority of serial killers or violent people out there. Most people, most serial killers even, don't fall under the visionary psychotic classification. They fall under the others we're going to be talking about in the next couple weeks. So don't think that this defines why people commit crimes is because they have a severe mental illness. And this brings me to my second caution. There is a movement in society to blame the severely mentally ill for a lot of societal ills. And it's not justified. We, by this point, have decades upon decades of research pointing to the one conclusion, that people who commit violent crimes, that they are usually people like us. People with severe mental health disorders are less likely than the rest of us to commit a violent crime against someone else, and more likely to be a victim of a violent crime than the rest of us. And at first this seems strange because you think it doesn't go along with everything I'm hearing in the news and in the media and politicians and all the rest. How does this make sense? Well, think about it. People with a severe mental health disorder have a very debilitating disorder. It doesn't leave them with the cognitive function, the ability to plan, process, think out, execute, and then cover up their tracks of a very violent crime. It's more likely that such a debilitating disease would put you in a position where you would be an easy target for somebody in the general population who wanted to make you a victim. And that's what we see occurring. So as we go through this, don't start thinking that, gee, we just need to just focus on people with severe mental health issues because those are the people we need to be afraid of. Because that's just not the reality. Another thing I want to talk about before we get too much into visionary is, it's easy when we talk about visionary serial killers to think, hey, aren't they all just crazy? Aren't they all insane? I mean, don't you have to be insane? We're talking about people who make psychotic breaks from reality. So are these people even liable for the things that they do? Well, we really need to understand what insanity is and what insanity isn't. Insanity is not a psychological term. If you look in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5, the DSM, which is what they use to diagnose mental health disorders, you will not find any diagnosis of insanity. It's not a psychological term. It's not a medical term. Insanity is purely a legal term. And basically what it means is that at the time of committing the crime, you, one, didn't understand that what you were doing was wrong, or two, you didn't realize the gravity or the whole strength of the consequences of the actions you were about to take. Now, the first prong of that's pretty easy for a prosecutor to get by and show that someone was, in fact, sane when they committed their crimes and should get the punishment to the full extent of the law. And that goes to if you tried to cover up your tracks, if you tried to hide evidence, if you tried in any way to make sure people didn't know what you were up to, then you knew what you were doing was wrong, at least on some level. Take, for instance, me. Just a little bit ago, I brought a big bag of chips into this office and ate a bunch of chips. Now, I didn't hide that I was bringing these chips into my office. I didn't put them up under my shirt as I walked through my living room and into my office. I didn't hide them under a desk or push them under some clothes so nobody would see the evidence of the chips that I had eaten. Because I was just eating some chips, who cares? There's nothing wrong with eating chips. So why would I go through the process and the trouble of trying to hide it? Well, the same basic principle applies when we talk about a criminal's ability to be found legally sane. If I as a prosecutor can prove that you did take steps to hide what you were doing was wrong, then you must have known it was wrong because you felt the need to hide it from other people in society. You must have at least thought that they would view, even if you thought what you were doing was right, you would know that society would feel what you were doing was wrong and would look at you bad for it, or there would be negative consequences. The second prong of that, not knowing the gravity of the consequences of your actions, I give the example of, let's say I'm a gun owner. I own guns, but I'm not a very responsible gun owner. So my 4-year-old gets the gun that I left on the table, and he goes and shoots his brother. Are we going to prosecute the 4-year-old for killing his brother? Probably not. And why aren't we? Well, because even though he might have known it was wrong, he might have known I wasn't supposed to get the gun, and he tries to hide it, throw it under a couch cushion, whatever a 4-year-old does. He did not understand truly the consequences of his actions and the depth of those consequences. He didn't understand that pointing that gun and shooting his brother meant that his brother was never going to be there again, or that his brother's never going to grow up and have a family, have friends, have a life, have work, have anything that we relate to having a life. That all that was going to be stripped from him by this one action. And so we wouldn't prosecute that 4-year-old. Now, we might prosecute the parents' neglect or contributing to delinquency, whatever it is we decided to prosecute them under. But we wouldn't necessarily convict a 4-year-old for murder because we don't feel like he has the cognitive ability to create the criminal intent necessary to commit murder because he doesn't understand the gravity of his actions. The same thing is true when we talk about mental illness. You can have a severe mental illness. You can have dissociative identity disorder, more commonly referred to as multiple personality disorder. You can have paranoid schizophrenia. You can have borderline personality disorder. You can have bipolar disorder. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter when we talk. And there's this misconception in the general public that those types of disorders just automatically mean insanity, you're going to get off. It doesn't work that way. As long as you can understand those two elements, what I'm doing is wrong and the full consequences of what I'm doing, it doesn't matter your mental health disorder. But if they leave you in such a state that you're incapable, like that 4-year-old, of understanding those elements, then the law says that there should be some, it should at least be taken into account as mitigating circumstances, and in some cases, taken into account fully as, not guilty by reason of insanity. So I want to keep those two things because sometimes that gets confusing, and I want to keep that straight before we really get moving on. So the visionary killer has a psychotic break from reality. Because of some severe mental illness, whatever it is, they start having delusions, hallucinations, whatever it is that pushes them and compels them to kill. And in a small number of these individuals, they'll actually not even want to kill. They may want to get caught. They may want to be killed because this is torture and horror for them. And others, they may really enjoy what they're doing, but they still feel compelled to do it because the devil's telling them to, and if they don't, the devil will take out their family or them, or God's telling them to do it. And as one of the people we're going to talk about said to his defense attorney, when God speaks, you listen. Or maybe they feel like that if they don't, a bunch of other people are going to die, or some really bad's going to happen. And so they feel compelled to kill. They may feel like they're the hero in the scenario, that they're saving lives by committing the crimes that they're committing. And we'll talk about some of those examples here in just a bit. The crime scenes don't make sense. They're very chaotic, very sporadic. To a rational man, or a woman, to a rational human being, they don't make sense. And that's because as a detective, you're taught to approach a crime scene using the principles and laws of logic, reason, and try to understand what the evidence and the scene put before you could mean. Well, that's the best way to approach most crime scenes, because again, we're talking about a small percentage of people who are out there killing. But with a visionary killer, that's not really going to help too much until you realize that you need to look at it not through your eyes and your laws of reason and your laws of logic, but looking through theirs. What does this crime scene tell you about their mental status? What does it tell you about what they're thinking, about what's compelling and driving their behavior? That's really what's important, and it's really hard sometimes, especially early on when you get that first crime scene, to be able to really understand I'm just going to call it a mess of what you're seeing in front of you. An example of a visionary killer would be Herbert Mullen. Now, this was a serial killer that operated in the early 1970s in the Santa Cruz area. I apologize, I still got that cough just a little bit that I had in the other video. I'm getting through it. Again, what can you do? Just apologize and move on. But he operated as a serial killer in the Santa Cruz area in the early 1970s. He was an interesting person in that he was a paranoid schizophrenic. He would eventually be diagnosed as such, and based on his symptoms, I would agree that he probably was. This individual believed that nature had to exist in an equilibrium. There had to be balance. Some people had to die. And if things got out of balance, not enough people died, Mother Nature would take it into its own hands and send some type of natural disaster to kill hundreds or thousands of people and bring everything back into equilibrium. And he began to be very nervous because war was winding down, not as many people were getting killed, and he felt like that there was an imbalance coming. And he would look at, and one of the symptoms, of paranoid schizophrenia is that they will often sit and just write, and I mean write on walls, write everywhere, write on their own bodies everywhere, trying to keep a detailed record of everything and linking different things. I actually heard someone call schizophrenia a disease of thinking differently, and I think that's a very good way to look at it. And they're trying to link everything they're seeing, and most of it is just gibberish to everybody else that sees it. It's just nonsensical. You can't make any sense out of it. But you can pick out a few things that kind of give you some insight into what the person's thinking. In this case, Herbert believed that in instances in history when murder rates went down, when wars were down, you also saw this influx of natural disasters, and that was Mother Nature's way of creating equilibrium. Now that this war was ending up, something had to be done to sustain that equilibrium. He believed that the date April 18th had a deep meaning. It was his birthday. It was also the day that it was also the anniversary of the day that Albert Einstein died. It was also the anniversary of the 1906 earthquake in California. And he thought that to believe that, hey, Albert Einstein gave his life to protect and keep away a natural disaster. Everybody born on this date from henceforth has a responsibility to do whatever they can do to avert whatever natural disasters may occur. He believed God spoke to him, made him the 13th disciple, and that God told him that he had to go out and kill these people in order to create this equilibrium. Because if he didn't kill these people, the people that he would kill, thousands upon thousands would die because nature would have the big earthquake in California, and it would be mass killings, not murders, but mass killings because of this natural disaster. And in order to prevent that, it was worth it to kill these few people who, most of them, he said, volunteered themselves anyway to be part of protecting the greater good of those thousands of people. He believed his dad telepathically told him to start killing, to go out there and start it, and he went right ahead and started. And so he started his killing. He was driving down the road. He sees a truck pulled over on the side of the road, got the hood up. Guy in there is an elderly gentleman in his 50s, looking into his hood, trying to figure out what's wrong with his car. He pulls over. He feels like this guy looks a little bit like Jonah from the Bible. And telepathically, Mr. White, who was the victim, told him that, you know what, I want to be one of the sacrifices to prevent this natural disaster. Kill me. And he's happy to oblige. He takes a baseball bat out and whacks him from behind in the back of the head and kills him. Goes down the road a little bit, and he sees a 24-year-old woman named Mary hitchhiking down the road. He kills her, cuts open her body cavity, takes out her internal organs, lays them out on the ground, and spends time trying to understand better the significance of this kill and its interrelationship with nature as a whole and preventing these natural disasters. He takes the internal organs, hangs them from a tree so he can stand back, look at them, and really, really feel the importance of what he's doing and the power of the connection to nature. After a while, he feels like this probably isn't the best way to live. And he was raised a Catholic, so he goes to see a Catholic priest at the church that his dad knows, Father Tomei. And he goes into the confessional, he's talking to the priest, and I guess he confesses what he'd done. But the priest decides, in his words, to volunteer himself as the next sacrifice to prevent this natural disaster. And of course, he obliges. He kills the priest in the church. And then he decides, you know what, I got an old friend. I'm going to go. We used to do drugs together. He used to do marijuana and LSD. I'm going to look him up and see if we can get high and have some fun or whatever. He goes down. He runs into a house. A woman by the name of Kathy Francis was there with her 9-year-old and her 4-year-old. He knocks on the door, and she's a bit uneased by him. She tells him that, hey, you know, your friend's down the road, and basically wants to send him on his way and get it because he's kind of creepy. But telepathically, she tells him, look, I want to be, and I want you to allow my kids to be the next sacrifices to prevent this natural disaster. So he kills her and her entire family. As time goes by, he finds himself about maybe a month later in the woods. He loves nature. After all, I mean, he's doing all this for God and Mother Nature, isn't he? And so he's really into nature, and he runs across these 4 teenage boys out camping in their tent. He feels like that they're harming nature in some way. He kills all 4 of them. His final murder is he kills some poor 70-some-year-old man in a drive-by shooting. Now think about this as a detective. How do you link these cases, these crime scenes? You got a guy hit in the head with a baseball bat, basically left alone after that. You've got a woman whose entrails are in a tree. You have a priest killed in a church. You have a mother with her 2 young children killed. You have 4 teenagers killed just by being shot. You have a drive-by. How do you connect these? What are the connecting threads? It turns out after he did the drive-by, he was pulled over and arrested because a neighbor had actually seen him shoot the guy and had been able to identify the car. So he was pulled over and arrested that way. In his mind, though, he's the hero. He's the hero of this story. I mean, yeah, he killed 13 people, but what's 13 lives from his rational point of view? What's 13 lives compared to thousands upon thousands that were saved by me averting this natural disaster? And plus these 13 people that I killed, these people that I murdered, a lot of them volunteered, telepathically of course, but they volunteered to be part of this and to be sacrificed for this greater good. I was the instrument of seeing through their sacrifice to keep this from happening in a lot of these cases. The courts didn't buy it. He was convicted and sentenced to the full extent of the law. But this is a good example to show just what a psychotic break can look like. Again, they're psychotic, which makes them difficult to investigate. The time and frequency of their crimes don't make sense because they don't even know for themselves necessarily when they're going to kill. When they kill is really dependent on whenever that psychotic break happens, and whatever pushes them to kill pushes them in that instance. And so there's no way to figure out, all right, they like to kill at this time. This is their pattern. You don't know, they don't know. It's just whenever that break happens. It's very random. The duration is different. You're not seeing the same process that you see in different killings. In one killing, Herbert bashed a man's head in with a baseball bat. Another one, he shoots 4 teenagers with a gun. Another one, he hangs some poor woman's innards up on a tree. So there's really no connection. There's really nothing you can get from the duration of the process or the occasion. The crime scenes are crazy. They're chaotic. Oftentimes evidence everywhere. Because again, these people you're dealing with people who have psychotic breaks, who have severe mental health disabilities. They don't have the cognitive function. Even if let's say they are sane and they do understand what they're doing is going to be considered wrong by the society at large, they still don't have the cognitive function to then go, this is the steps I need to take to make sure that I don't leave any evidence for the police and I don't get caught. They don't often bring weapons with them, bring materials with them, because they never know when the psychotic break's going to happen. They never know when they're going to be called on to commit the next murder, and so they just randomly have to use whatever's available to them. And so what you're going to see when you go into these crime scenes is not going to make a lot of sense from a rational mind, but you have to realize you're not dealing with a rational individual. Again, there's plenty of evidence. Their motivations are usually internal, psychological to themselves. Even if it's something that would seem external, like Herbert thinking he was preventing an external earthquake from happening by committing these murders, the reality is that was only true in his psychosis that existed within his mind. There was no real connection between him killing people and preventing an earthquake in California. And the anticipated gains are psychological, whether it be to appease the demon that's chasing you around, or it is to prevent the earthquake, or to prevent you from dying, or whatever it is. The benefits are all psychological. They're all in the mind of the visionary killer. They don't have any ideal victim type. You'll see that with a lot of the other serial killers we're going to talk about. Visionaries don't really have an ideal victim type, and that's because they don't really even know who's going to be the victim. It's just whoever happens to be unlucky enough to be in that area when the psychotic break happens. Their methods of murder, they're unplanned. Again, they don't even know when they're going to kill. They often use whatever's there. And whatever they did use, they often just drop. You'll see evidence everywhere. Their murder locations are geographically stable. This is important. And if you think about this, makes sense from their psychological disability. They want to stay in a comfort zone. They want to stay somewhere where they feel secure, like they feel like they have some control. And so they'll stay close to home, or close to work, or close to their parents' house, or some other place of significance, maybe a park that they feel really comfortable at, because that gives them a sense of comfort and somewhat control. Now, there is what's called a distance decay function over time, which means that over time, as they continue to kill, that geographic area will expand slightly, but it'll still be relatively small, because their condition wants them to stay somewhere that they feel comfortable and they feel safe. Richard Trenton Chase is the next one we're going to talk about. This was an individual, killed 6 people. He killed 6 people. And this individual believed that he was a hypochondriac from an early age. And he believed he had all kinds of physical ailments. Now, the doctors couldn't find any ailments. And when you hear about the ailments he had, they're not real ailments. He believed his blood was turning to powder. He believed that someone had stole his pulmonary artery going to his heart. He believed that his stomach had turned upside down. He believed the bones in his skull were moving around, and he actually shaved his head so he could track that. He was diagnosed a paranoid schizophrenic. He felt like the only way to combat these medical conditions and to keep himself healthy and alive was to drink blood. And he started out killing and mutilating animals and drinking their blood and eating part of their raw flesh. Actually shot himself up with some rabbit blood at one time and found himself in a mental hospital for 5 months. They decided he wasn't dangerous to society and released him. His mom actually seen him with a bloody cat, blood dripping all over him and stuff. And he moved out after that. And that's what he did because he felt like that's what would keep him alive and healthy. I mean, his blood's turning to powder, you know. Things really got heated after an event in 1977 at a place called Pyramid Lake in Nevada. The police pull up, they see this car, nobody's in it. And inside the car there's tons of blood, and there's this organ laying there, this part of something's entrails. And they think, man, this guy's just killed somebody. And they look around to try to see if they can see who might be around that might be a suspect. And they look, and way across the river on like a hill type thing, there's this naked guy, covered, just covered in blood. Believed that if he covered himself in blood, that would seep in and help his conditions. They run over, they arrest him, and they take him to jail. Well, it turns out that was cow's blood and a cow's organ. He had killed a local cow, drank the blood, ate some of the whatever, and that was what that was from, and the blood was from. So they eventually release him because it was a cow, it wasn't a person. Shortly after that, he starts killing people. And he starts mutilating them. When he killed, he cut women from here down to their privates, tear open their body cavity, play around in the entrails of their body, eat parts of it, drink their blood. An example of something that might be curious that you may not understand at a crime scene right away, the detectives talked about how at the crime scene of one of his victims, there was a little, like a yogurt cup, and it had blood in it and around it. And all around the body and stuff, there was these little circles with like driplets around, just scattered around kind of randomly. And they were like, we didn't really know what that meant. Well, what it turned out to be was he was using that to drink their blood, and he was putting it down and picking it back up. And if you take a cup and you lay it on a table, we all know condensation, or if there's something spilled, it'll make a ring, and when you pick it up, it'll drip a little bit, and you'll see that pattern. And it's random because you don't always set the cup down in the same place. That was what was happening with this, and that's what that meant, that little piece of evidence. So here was a guy who killed because his psychosis told him, this is the only way you're going to be healthy. This may be the only way you're going to survive. It's basically this or, sickness and death, or death. So that was his psychosis. Again, he was convicted. The insanity plea didn't work in his case, partially because the prosecutor was successful in arguing that there were signs that he at least attempted to cover his tracks. I don't think he was, in that he, in one case, washed a knife that he had used in the person's house to kill him, saying that he did that to keep from being caught. I don't think that's true because he also walked around with a jacket that had bloodstains all over it. And how he got caught was the day he killed one of his victims. He had met somebody he had known from high school at a store, and he had tried to pick her up. And she was nervous. She was scared. She said he looked like he was like in some type of a psychotic or a hypnotic state. And she got in her car and drove off real quick. And she said he actually had blood on his hands when he did this, or that she thought he had blood on his hands. She had seen after that a sketch someone had made based on a neighbor who saw a person that looked like the sketch going into the house where this person was killed. And she said she thought it looked like him, so she told her detective dad. They go out and go to question him, about 3 detectives or 4, I can't remember how many. They knock on the door, he doesn't answer, but they can hear something shuffling in there. So they decide to back off, go call and get some advice on what to do next, whether they need to get a warrant or what from the police station. And they just kind of backed off. Well, he comes out with a bloody pail with rags of human blood on it and takes off when he sees them, and they wrestle him down, arrest him. Luckily, nobody gets hurt because he does have a weapon. He actually has the .22 that he used to kill people on him at the time he's arrested, plus some artifacts of some of the people he killed. They go inside his apartment, and there's parts of body innards and intestines or whatever and organs. There's internal body parts in a blender with Coca-Cola mixed in with it. Just really a disgusting sight. But in his mind, he supposedly believed that this is what he had to do to stay healthy and stay alive. So the one thing I want to leave you with when we talk about serial killers, the visionary killer anyway, you can't understand them through your rational mind. You can't understand why they're doing what they're doing, what their crime scenes mean, how to link their crime scenes, because it can be really hard to link their crime scenes. They may not even look alike. Remember when we talked about Herbert? He bashed a guy in the head with a baseball bat. He hung a woman's internal organs on a tree. He then shot 4 teenagers in a tent. These crimes are not similar. There's nothing really linking them together other than there's deaths involved. So you really have to get outside your comfort zone, really try to get outside your ideas about what's logical, what's reasonable, because what's logical, what makes sense, what has strong laws of reason attached to it are going to be different to a person who's had a psychotic break. You got to think about what's going on in their head and not in our reality. And with that, I'm going to leave you until next week when we talk about the mission-oriented killer. I hope you have a great week. See you next time.